Imagine for a moment that you're standing in line at customs. You hand over your passport. The officer flips through it, stamps it, and waves you through. Simple, right? Now imagine that same scenario, but when the officer opens your passport, they freeze. Their face goes pale. They look at you, then back at the document, then at you again, because the country printed on that passport, the place you call home, the nation you visited dozens of times for business, doesn't exist. It never has. Not on any map, not in any history book, not in any database on Earth. And yet here you are, standing in front of them, as real as the air they breathe, insisting that you've been traveling there your entire life. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This happened. In 1954, at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, a man arrived with a passport from a country called Taured. And what happened next reveals a terrifying secret about time travel, parallel realities, and the thin fabric that separates our world from countless others. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll question everything you thought you knew about the nature of reality itself. July 1954. Post-war Japan is rebuilding, reconnecting with the world. Haneda Airport in Tokyo is busy with international travelers, businessmen, tourists, people moving between nations like threads in a growing tapestry. It's a hot summer day, the kind where the air feels thick, where time seems to slow down. And on this particular day, a well-dressed European man approaches the customs desk. He's confident, calm, carrying himself like someone who's done this 1,000 times before. He speaks multiple languages fluently. His suit is impeccable. He has the bearing of a seasoned international businessman. Nothing about him seems out of the ordinary, until they check his passport. The customs officer opens a document, and immediately something feels wrong. The passport looks legitimate. The pages are worn from use, filled with stamps from various countries, exactly what you'd expect from someone who travels frequently. But the country of origin, printed clearly on the first page, is Taured. The officer has never heard of it. He calls his supervisor. The supervisor has never heard of it either. They bring out maps, atlases, reference books. Nothing. No country called Taured exists anywhere on Earth. And this is where the story shifts from unusual to impossible. Because the man doesn't react like someone who's been caught with a fake passport. He doesn't panic. He doesn't try to run. He doesn't make excuses. Instead, he becomes confused and frustrated, then genuinely disturbed. He insists with absolute conviction that Taured is real. He's been traveling there for business for years. He points to the stamps in his passport, evidence of his previous trips through Tokyo. He explains that Taured is located in Europe, between France and Spain, where the Andorra region should be. He even indicates the exact location on the map, becoming increasingly agitated when the officials tell him there's no country there. Only mountains. Only Andorra. A tiny principality he's never heard of. Think about that for a second. Put yourself in his position. Imagine insisting that your home country exists, showing documentation, showing evidence, and having an entire airport full of officials tell you that you're wrong. That the place you were born, the place you've lived your entire life, the place you returned between business trips, simply isn't real. How would you react? What would go through your mind? Would you think they're lying to you? Would you think you're going insane? Or would something deeper, something more primal, start to whisper that reality itself has somehow shifted beneath your feet? The Japanese authorities don't know what to make of this. The man's passport looks authentic, not forged. The paper, the ink, the stamps, the wear patterns, everything about it suggests it's a genuine government document. But it's a document from a government that doesn't exist. They check his other papers. He has currency from several European countries, all legitimate. He has business documents from a company that, when they try to verify it, doesn't exist either. The address listed doesn't correspond to any known location. The phone numbers don't connect. It's as if he's arrived from a place that exists in every detail except reality itself. The officials make a decision. They can't let him enter Japan, not with documentation they can't verify. But they also can't immediately deport him without processing his case. So they take him to a hotel nearby, place him in a room, and post guards outside his door and beneath his window. The room is on a high floor. There's no balcony. No way out except through the guarded door. They keep his passport and documents for further investigation. They tell him they'll sort this out in the morning. And here's where the story transforms from mysterious to absolutely terrifying. The next morning, when the officials come to question him further, the man is gone, completely vanished. The door was guarded all night. The window was watched. The room was multiple stories up with no fire escape, no ledge, no possible way to climb down. The guards swear no one entered or left. There was no disturbance, no sound, nothing. They search the room and find it exactly as it was left, except for one chilling detail. His passport is gone. All his documents are gone. Every piece of evidence that he ever existed has disappeared with him. The hotel register shows his name, but even that seemed to fade in importance when there's no physical proof left behind. It's as if reality itself reached in and erased him, pulled him back to wherever he came from, or perhaps corrected an error that should never have occurred. Now, I want you to do something with me right now. I want you to leave a comment telling me what year you're watching this from, because time, as we're about to explore, is far stranger than we've been taught to believe. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching this video is experiencing it from a slightly different timeline than you are. It sounds absurd, right? But after what we're about to uncover about the Taured case, you might not be so sure. Go ahead, drop that year in the comments. I'll wait. Let's see how many different timelines are converging on this video right now. So what actually happened at Haneda Airport in 1954? The conventional explanation, the one that skeptics immediately reach for, is that this was simply a con artist with a fake passport who managed to escape custody. But that explanation crumbles under even basic scrutiny. First, if you're creating a fake passport to commit fraud, why would you invent an entirely fictional country? That's the worst possible approach. A forger would use a real country, possibly with fake credentials, but never a non-existent nation that would immediately draw attention and investigation. It defeats the entire purpose of forgery. Second, how did he escape from a guarded, high-floor hotel room with no possible exit? The logistics make no sense. And third, why would a con artist react with genuine confusion and distress when told his country doesn't exist? A criminal would have a backup story, would try to talk their way out, would show signs of deception. This man showed signs of someone whose entire reality was being challenged. Let's consider another possibility. Could this have been an elaborate hoax, a performance, perhaps an early example of what we now call alternate reality gaming or social experiment? But in 1954, Japan was still recovering from World War II. Airport security was taken extremely seriously. The authorities weren't in the mood for pranks, and the consequences for attempting such a stunt would have been severe. Moreover, who was the audience? The story didn't become widely known until years later. If this was performance art, it was performed for a handful of customs officials and then hidden from the world for decades. That makes no sense as a hoax. So if it wasn't fraud and it wasn't a hoax, what are we left with? We're left with possibilities that challenge everything we understand about the nature of reality, time, and existence itself. And this is where the terrifying secret I mentioned at the beginning starts to reveal itself. Because the Taured incident isn't an isolated case. It's part of a pattern that suggests the boundaries between different timelines, different versions of Earth, different realities, might be far more permeable than we've ever imagined. Let me take you deeper into this. In physics, there's a concept called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. It proposes that every quantum event, every moment where multiple outcomes are possible, causes reality to branch into parallel universes where each outcome occurs. In one universe, you chose coffee this morning. In another, you chose tea. In another, you didn't have either. Multiply this by every quantum event occurring constantly across the entire universe, and you get an infinite number of parallel realities, all existing simultaneously, all equally real, just separated from each other by quantum barriers we can't perceive or cross. In most of these realities, the differences are minor, trivial, but in some, history unfolded differently. Borders were drawn differently. Nations formed, merged, or never existed based on different chains of events. In one of those realities, perhaps a country called Taured exists exactly where the man said it did, between France and Spain. Its history as rich and detailed as any nation in our world. Now here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. What if those barriers between realities, those quantum walls that separate infinite versions of Earth, aren't as solid as we think? What if, under certain conditions, they can become thin, permeable, or even break down entirely? What if someone could slip from one reality to another without even realizing it until something goes wrong, until they try to go home and discover that home doesn't exist in this version of the world? Think about the man from Taured's experience from this perspective. He wakes up in his country, in his home, in a reality where Taured is as real as France or Germany or Japan. He packs his bags for a business trip to Tokyo, something he's done many times before. He goes to the airport, boards a plane, flies across multiple countries and time zones. Everything is normal. Everything is exactly as it should be. The plane lands at Haneda Airport. He gathers his belongings, walks to customs, hands over his passport. And in that moment, without any awareness, without any sensation, he realizes he's in the wrong reality, not the wrong airport, not the wrong country, the wrong version of Earth entirely, where Taured doesn't exist, where it never existed, where the geography, the history, the entire fabric of political reality is subtly but definitively different from the world he left that morning. Can you imagine the horror of that realization? You're not lost. You're not in the wrong place. You're in the wrong reality. And you have no idea how you got here or how to get back. Every map is wrong. Every atlas is wrong. The officials looking at you think you're crazy or criminal. But you know with absolute certainty that you're neither. You're just displaced, ripped from your timeline and deposited in one that's almost identical but fundamentally different in ways that make it impossible for you to exist here properly. You're a glitch, an anomaly, a piece of reality that doesn't fit into this version of the puzzle. And then, after a night in a guarded hotel room, something happens. Maybe you fall asleep and slip back through whatever quantum accident brought you here. Maybe reality itself corrects the error, pulling you back to where you belong like a rubber band snapping back into place. Maybe the barriers between worlds are thinner when we're unconscious, when our observation of reality is suspended, allowing us to drift back to our proper timeline. You vanish from the room. The guards never see you leave because you don't leave through the door or window. You leave through a dimension they can't perceive, back to a world where Taured exists and you were never missing at all. And in that world, maybe you woke up in your own bed, confused about a strange dream you had about being trapped in a version of Japan where everyone insisted your country wasn't real. But here's what keeps me up at night about this case. If this interpretation is correct, if the man from Taured really did slip between realities, then it means the barriers are breakable. It means that somewhere under some circumstances we don't fully understand, people can move between timelines. And if it happened once, it can happen again. It might be happening all the time, in small ways we don't notice. Have you ever experienced a moment where something felt wrong, where a detailed reality seemed different from how you remembered it, where other people recall an event differently than you do? We usually dismiss these as faulty memory, as tricks of the mind. But what if some of those moments are something else? What if they're echoes of timeline shifts, small cracks in reality that we rationalize away because the alternative is too disturbing to accept? There's a phenomenon that's gained attention in recent years called the Mandela effect, where large groups of people remember historical details differently from how they actually occurred. Thousands of people remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, even though he actually died in 2013. People remember a children's book series being spelled differently than it actually is. Movie quotes, brand names, geographical details, all remembered wrong by huge numbers of people in exactly the same way. The conventional explanation is that these are examples of collective false memory, our brains all making the same mistakes for psychological reasons. But what if the truth is stranger? What if these are memories from alternate timelines, echoes of realities where those details really were different, bleeding through into our collective consciousness because some of us, at some point, briefly existed in those other versions of reality before sliding back here? I'm not asking you to believe this. I'm asking you to consider it, to hold the possibility in your mind and see how it feels. Because once you start looking at reality through this lens, the world becomes a far more mysterious place. And cases like the man from Taured stop being isolated anomalies and start being evidence of something profound and terrifying about the nature of existence itself. Let me share something else with you, something that makes this even more compelling. The Taured case isn't unique. There are other documented incidents of people appearing with documentation from places that don't exist, or disappearing in ways that defy physical explanation. In 1951, a woman appeared at a checkpoint in Germany claiming to be from a country no one had heard of. She had documents, currency, and became distressed when told her nation didn't exist. She was detained for psychological evaluation and vanished from a locked facility 3 days later. In 1962, a man in Paris tried to exchange currency from a European country that wasn't on any map. When police investigated, both he and the money disappeared from the holding cell. These stories are harder to verify, buried in obscure reports and foreign language documents. But the pattern is consistent. People appearing from nowhere, carrying evidence of places that don't exist, then vanishing when the walls of reality seem to close in around them. And it's not just people from other places. Sometimes it's people from other times. There are cases documented and investigated of individuals appearing with no memory of how they got there, wearing clothing from different eras, speaking archaic dialects, confused by technology that to us is commonplace, but to them seems like impossible magic. Some of these get written off as mental illness, amnesia, elaborate role-playing. But occasionally, just occasionally, there are details that don't fit, objects that shouldn't exist, knowledge that couldn't be faked, reactions that seem too genuine to be performance. In 1976, a man appeared in Times Square in New York, confused and terrified. He was wearing clothing from the 1870s, carried currency from that era that was authentic, not reproduction, and spoke English with an accent and vocabulary that linguists confirmed was consistent with that time period. He was hit by a car while fleeing in panic from the modern vehicles around him. In his pockets, they found business cards for companies that had existed in New York a century earlier, a ticket stub for a theater that had burned down in 1883, and a photograph of himself standing on a street that no longer existed, surrounded by buildings that had been demolished generations ago. He died from his injuries. His case was filed as a John Doe with mental disturbance. But some of the items he carried were analyzed by historians and found to be genuinely from the 1870s, but were patterns suggesting they'd been in continuous use, not preserved as antiques. Who was he? Where did he come from? Did he slip forward in time somehow, arriving a century later in a world he couldn't comprehend, only to die confused and alone, surrounded by people who thought he was insane? These stories exist at the edges of documented reality. They're not mainstream. They don't get taught in schools or discussed in scientific journals. But they're there, if you know where to look, forming a pattern that suggests something extraordinary and deeply unsettling about the nature of time and reality. And the more you investigate, the more you start to wonder how many of these incidents are dismissed, covered up, or simply forgotten because they don't fit into our understanding of how the world works. How many people have slipped between timelines, been detained as mentally ill or criminal, and vanished back to where they came from before anyone could properly investigate? How many reports exist in dusty files in government archives, unexplained and deliberately left unexplained, because the alternative would require us to completely rethink our understanding of physics, consciousness, and existence itself? Now, let's talk about the science, because as bizarre as all this sounds, there are theoretical frameworks in physics that actually support the possibility of what we're discussing. The many worlds interpretation isn't fringe science. It's a legitimate interpretation of quantum mechanics proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957, just 3 years after the Taured incident. It's taken seriously by physicists because it elegantly solves certain paradoxes in quantum theory. But it also implies something radical, that every possible version of history exists simultaneously in parallel realities, all equally real, all equally physical, just isolated from each other by quantum decoherence. Einstein's theory of relativity tells us that time isn't a fixed, universal constant. It's relative, flexible, affected by gravity and velocity. Time moves differently in different reference frames. This isn't philosophy. This is measurable, proven physics. GPS satellites have to account for time dilation, or they wouldn't work. Astronauts age slightly slower than people on Earth. Time is not what our everyday experience suggests it is. It's far stranger. Combine these concepts, many worlds, and time relativity, and you get a theoretical framework where movement between timelines isn't just possible, but perhaps inevitable under certain extreme conditions. Maybe strong gravitational fields. Maybe specific quantum states. Maybe the intersection of electromagnetic phenomena in ways we don't yet understand. The mathematics allows for it. The physics doesn't rule it out. We just don't know how to do it deliberately, how to control it, or even how to detect when it's happening naturally. There's also the concept in physics of closed time-like curves, solutions to Einstein's equations that theoretically allow for time travel. These aren't science fiction. They're mathematical realities within our best understanding of how space-time works. They exist around rotating black holes, in certain configurations of exotic matter, in theoretical constructs like wormholes. We've never observed them directly, but the math says they should exist. And if they exist, they open the door to possibilities that seem impossible, but are technically allowed by the laws of physics as we currently understand them. Here's what truly unsettles me about all this. If timeline slips are possible, if people can accidentally move between realities, then it means the universe is far less stable than we think. It means that the reality we experience, the continuity of our lives, the certainty that tomorrow will follow the same physical laws as today, all of that is potentially fragile. We exist in one version of an infinite multiverse, and under the right or perhaps wrong conditions, we could slip into another version where things are subtly or drastically different. And we might not even realize it happened unless something glaring makes it obvious, like a country that doesn't exist or technology that shouldn't be possible yet. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever experienced something that felt like reality glitched? A moment where you could swear something was different than it is now? A street that you remember being somewhere else? A person you're certain you met who claims you never did? A historical fact you clearly learned one way in school that now, when you look it up, is completely different? Most of us have these experiences occasionally. We dismiss them. We assume our memory is faulty. But what if, even once, it wasn't your memory that was wrong? What if it was reality that shifted, and you retain an echo of how things were before? The implications are staggering. It means we can't fully trust our perception of reality. It means history itself might be more fluid than we believe. It means that somewhere in another version of Earth, there's a version of you living a life that's almost the same but different in small or significant ways. Maybe in that reality, you made a different choice at a critical moment. Maybe someone you know there doesn't exist here, or someone who exists here never existed there. Maybe, in that reality, Taured is a thriving European nation, and the man who appeared at Haneda Airport made it home safely, told his colleagues about the strange experience he had in a version of Japan where everyone insisted his country didn't exist, and they all laughed about it, never knowing that in this reality, in our timeline, he became one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. And here's a question that might sound strange, but bear with me. How do you know you haven't slipped between timelines yourself? If the differences were subtle enough, if most things remain the same, how would you even tell? Maybe that feeling of déjà vu isn't a memory glitch, but a brief overlap between realities. Maybe those dreams that feel hyperreal aren't dreams at all, but glimpses into parallel versions of your life. Maybe, right now, there's a version of you in another timeline watching a video about a completely different mystery, living a life that's 99% the same as yours, but different in that one crucial percent. The man from Taured, if this interpretation is correct, was unlucky enough to have the differences be obvious and undeniable. He couldn't pretend. He couldn't rationalize it away. The evidence that he was in the wrong reality was right there in front of him, stamped on his passport, confirmed by every map and official he encountered. But maybe others slip between timelines every day, and the differences are small enough that they just assume they misremembered, that they're confused, that they're experiencing normal human error, when in fact they're experiencing something far stranger. How many people right now are walking around with memories that don't match this timeline's history, and they've convinced themselves their memory is just faulty? Let me bring this back to something more grounded for a moment, because I know this is heavy, reality-bending stuff. Let's look at what we actually know for certain about the Taured case. We know that in 1954, something unusual happened at Haneda Airport involving a man with questionable documentation. We know the story has been retold and investigated multiple times over the decades. We know that despite extensive research, no one has been able to definitively prove or disprove the core elements of the story. It exists in that uncomfortable space between legend and documented history, with enough consistent details across retellings to suggest something real happened, but not enough hard evidence to say exactly what. Some researchers have tried to track down original Japanese police reports from that time period. They've searched newspaper archives from Tokyo in July 1954. And here's what's interesting. They found references to unusual incidents at the airport, but nothing detailed enough to confirm or deny the specific story. It's possible that the incident was handled quietly, without public reporting, because the authorities themselves didn't know how to classify or explain it. It's also possible that over 70 years, some details have been exaggerated or changed as the story passed from person to person. That's how legends form, after all, a kernel of truth wrapped in layers of embellishment, until it's hard to see where fact ends and fiction begins. But even if we can't prove every detail of the Taured story, the questions it raises remain valid and important, because we know from physics that parallel realities are theoretically possible. We know that time is stranger than everyday experience suggests. We know that there are documented cases of people appearing or disappearing in ways that challenge conventional explanation. So whether the Taured incident happened exactly as told, or whether the somewhat exaggerated version of a real event, or whether it's a complete fabrication that happens to point toward a deeper truth, the underlying question persists. Are the boundaries between timelines truly impassable, or are they more like borders on a map, lines that seem absolute until someone finds a way across? I want to share one more thing with you, and then I'll bring this to a close with a thought that I hope will stay with you long after this video ends. There are people, researchers, and scientists who take the possibility of parallel realities and timeline shifts seriously enough to study them. They're looking for evidence in physics experiments, in astronomical observations, in the strange edge cases of quantum mechanics, where particles seem to exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. They're developing mathematical models for how reality might branch, and under what conditions those branches might reconnect or overlap. This isn't pseudoscience. This is cutting-edge theoretical physics, exploring questions that would have seemed like pure fantasy a century ago, but now are legitimate areas of inquiry. Some of these researchers suggest that if timeline shifts do occur naturally, they might be associated with specific conditions: high-energy events, unusual electromagnetic phenomena, regions where space-time is stressed or curved in particular ways. There are places on Earth where strange things seem to happen more frequently than probability would suggest. The Bermuda Triangle is a famous example, though most of its reputation is exaggerated. But there are other locations less sensationalized where disappearances, time anomalies, and reality glitches get reported with unusual frequency. Are these places where the barriers between timelines are naturally thinner? Are they areas where the fabric of reality is somehow more permeable? We don't know. But the pattern is intriguing enough that some serious researchers are paying attention. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. If the man from Taured really did slip between realities, if he really was a traveler from a parallel Earth who accidentally crossed into ours, then his disappearance from that hotel room suggests something profound. It suggests that reality has a way of correcting itself, of pulling anomalies back to where they belong. It suggests that we exist in a kind of quantum equilibrium, where deviations from the norm create pressure to return to the proper state. He didn't belong in this timeline, so this timeline rejected him, sent him back, or perhaps allowed him to slip back when conditions aligned. And if that's true, it means that reality is self-regulating in ways we don't understand, maintaining the integrity of each timeline by not allowing permanent cross-contamination. But it also means that the boundaries, while self-correcting, are not impermeable. They can be crossed. Perhaps rarely, perhaps accidentally, perhaps only under specific conditions, but they can be crossed. And once you accept that possibility, once you allow yourself to consider that the reality you experience might not be the only reality, that there might be infinite versions of Earth existing simultaneously just beyond a quantum veil you can't perceive, everything changes. Your sense of stability, your confidence in the permanence of history, your certainty about what's real and what's not, all of it becomes just a little more fragile, a little more uncertain. So I'll ask you this, and I genuinely want to know your thoughts. Leave a comment below. Do you think the man from Taured was a time traveler, a reality shifter, a traveler from a parallel Earth? Do you think he was something else entirely? Or do you think this is all just a fascinating legend with no basis in reality? Have you ever experienced something in your own life that made you question the stability of reality? A moment where things felt wrong, where memory and experience didn't align, where you wondered, even for a second, if you'd somehow slipped into a slightly different version of the world? And if you found this exploration valuable, if it made you think about reality in a new way, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that content like this matters, that deep dives into the mysteries of time and existence deserve to be seen. Subscribe if you want more investigations into cases like this, into strange edges of reality where science and mystery overlap. Because there are so many more stories out there, so many more incidents that challenge everything we think we know about how the universe works. And I plan to explore every one of them with you. The truth is, we don't know what happened to the man from Taured. We may never know. But the fact that a story exists, that it's been told and retold for 70 years, that it resonates with something deep in our understanding of how strange reality can be, that means something. It means we instinctively recognize that the world is more mysterious than we're usually willing to admit. That time might not be as linear as we experience it. That reality might not be as singular as we assume. And that sometimes the impossible happens, and all we can do is witness it, document it, and wonder what it means about the nature of existence itself. So keep questioning, keep exploring, keep looking at the world with the awareness that beneath the surface of everyday normality, there might be depths of strangeness we've only begun to glimpse. And maybe, just maybe, if you pay close attention, you'll notice when reality glitches around you, when something feels wrong, when a detail doesn't match your memory. And in that moment, instead of dismissing it, you'll pause and wonder, did something just shift? Am I in a slightly different timeline than I was yesterday? And if so, what does that mean for everything I thought I knew about the world? The man from Taured walked into an airport in Tokyo in 1954 and revealed a terrifying secret about reality, that it's not as solid as we think, that the boundaries between different versions of Earth, different timelines, different possibilities, might be crossable under the right conditions, that we live in a universe far stranger and more complex than our everyday experience suggests, and that somewhere in an infinite multiverse of parallel realities, there's a version of Earth where Taured exists, where that man made it home safely, and where this entire mystery never happened because in that reality, there was no mystery at all. He was just a businessman passing through customs like he'd done 100 times before. And we're the ones living in the strange timeline, the one where his country doesn't exist and his disappearance remains unexplained. Think about that. Let it sit with you. And when you're ready, let me know in the comments what you think. Because this conversation, this exploration of the boundaries of reality, it doesn't end here. It's just beginning. And I want you to be part of it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for questioning. And I'll see you in the next investigation into the impossible, the unexplained, and the mysteries that exist at the edges of time itself.